Action heroes of history. Peter Francisco, the Virginia Hercules. He is one of the most incredible people I have ever talked about. If it wasn't known to be true, you'd think his life story was a tall tale like Paul Bunyan or John Henry. Peter Francisco, however, was very real and someone every American should know about. He was an actual giant, especially during the 18th century, standing at 6 feet 8 inches tall. His very early years are shrouded in mystery. He was found orphaned on the docks at age 5 with no explanation. Eventually, he was adopted by a family and grew to epic proportions. When the American Revolution came, he became the biggest and mightiest soldier of them all, helping America win the war. Peter's nickname was the Virginia Hercules. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Peter has a big story to tell, and he deserves his due. From tiny acorns do tall trees grow. The year was 1765. In City Point, Virginia, a little boy wandered the docks. He could not speak English. He did, however, keep repeating the name Pedro Francisco. It was discovered that the boy spoke Portuguese and that his clothing was of good quality. Locals kept calling him Peter, and that's the name he stuck with for the rest of his life. Peter was taken to the Prince George County poorhouse. When the people finally found someone to communicate with the boy, they learned he had lived in a mansion near the ocean. His mother spoke French, and his father spoke another language he didn't know. Peter and his sister were kidnapped from their home, but she escaped. Peter, though, was bound and taken to a ship. It is believed Peter Francisco came from a wealthy family of noble standing in Portugal. Although his family was originally mainlanders, they moved off the continent to the island of Terceira in order to distance themselves from personal and political enemies. When Peter and his sister were kidnapped, it was probably for ransom or to sell them as indentured servants in America. When Peter was released on the docks, it is thought that the kidnappers changed their mind about monetary gain. Peter's kidnapping may also have been an act of mercy by the kidnappers. The Francisco family was under constant threat by political enemies. Peter was probably taken far away to keep him from getting killed. He was adopted by a judge named Anthony Winston and his family. As an interesting connection, Winston was the uncle of Patrick Henry, the famous "give me liberty or give me death" guy. Peter was raised by the Winstons. He lived with them until the beginning of the Revolutionary War, when he was just 16. Peter's treatment by the Winstons seems to be up for debate. Some accounts say he was treated lovingly by them and was even tutored to some degree. Other accounts say he was treated like a slave and forced to work on the judge's 3,600-acre plantation. Meanwhile, the several children that the judge already had before Peter were spoiled and didn't have to work. Although Judge Winston took Peter in, it is likely that history flowered up the relationship between them a bit. Once Peter left the Winstons, it doesn't seem like he had much contact with them, if any at all. He also had to go to school after the war to learn how to read and write. It doesn't appear that Peter was abused by them, though. On top of all the other strangeness surrounding Peter, he grew to be 6 feet 8 inches tall. That's a big size now, but especially in 1776. He weighed about 260 pounds. Given his great size and strength, he apprenticed as a blacksmith. It's uncertain when his hair turned silver, but it was probably during or shortly after the war. People nicknamed Peter such things as the Virginia Hercules or the Virginia Giant. At any rate, he stood out, literally and figuratively. Army of One. Although a big man, Peter was just 16 when he started fighting in Blood and Guts War in 1776. he quickly became a soldier of distinction. Although he had commanding officers, Peter essentially fought as an army of one. Even George Washington himself called Peter Francisco an army of one. Peter was a force to be reckoned with, and even though he got hurt from time to time, he healed up and was back out there beating more redcoat butt. At the age of 18, Peter took a musket ball to the right thigh. He never fully recovered from this wound, but he was still a very active soldier. In the Battle of Stony Point, which America won, 19-year-old Peter took a 9-inch gash to the stomach, but continued to fight. Yes, Peter was raw and untrained as a soldier, but why did he keep getting hurt like this? The problem was simple. Peter was too big of a man for a little man war. Nothing was built to his scale. He found the swords he had to use too short and too light. Peter had to get too close to take someone out, where a smaller man could do it unscathed. When Peter was 20, he did one of his most famous things. The Battle of Camden in South Carolina was lost to the British. When the Americans were fleeing, Peter noticed that they were leaving behind one of their most valuable cannons. Why? It was stuck in the mud. Peter knew he could get it out, so he picked up the 1,100-pound cannon and carried it on his shoulder to keep it from getting into enemy hands. It's said that he carried the cannon about 200 yards. The mighty sword of Peter Francisco. There is a legend, and it's most likely true, that Peter was personally recognized by the man himself, General George Washington, for his impressive actions during the war so far. Peter had long complained of the tiny swords he had to use when fighting. Because they were so short for him, he had to move too close in range and ended up getting stuck. George personally commissioned a 6-foot-long broadsword just for Peter to use. Only he could lift or wield this incredible sword. Whether Peter actually used this sword or not has been debated, but we know that it existed. Many years after Peter died, his daughter, Mrs. Edward Pescud, presented the sword to the Virginia Historical Society. Since that time, though, the sword has disappeared. What could have happened to it? It is quite an artifact. The giant sword of Peter Francisco, allegedly ordered by George Washington himself? If it still exists anywhere, it needs to be recovered for everyone to see. What better way is there to honor two great men? The sword in action? Maybe. At the age of 20, close to 21, Peter heard that Colonel William Washington, George's cousin, was going on a march through the Carolinas. I did a video on William Washington, who was an incredible soldier and remains highly underrated today. Check it out. During the Revolution, though, William was highly respected by American soldiers. Peter wanted to join up with him. It was at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina where Peter made one of his greatest slaughters. Allegedly, Peter took his giant sword, given to him by George Washington, into battle. He killed 11 soldiers, even though he took a bayonet to the thigh. This impressed even the seasoned William Washington. Peter's achievements at this battle were commemorated with a monument to him at the Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. Did Peter actually use the famous giant sword at this battle? We can't know for sure, but that's how the story goes. It would be cool if he did, but just the same, 11 soldiers? Dang. The thigh wound from the bayonet, though, was quite serious, and he was sent home to Buckingham, Virginia to heal. This was something you know Peter wouldn't do under most circumstances because he was a rough son of a gun, but he needed to do it. This didn't stop him from being a massive physical threat, however, and it led to him performing his most famous action, known as Francisco's Fight. Francisco's Fight. While recuperating from his bayonet wound, Peter volunteered to spy on the British Legion who were operating in his area of Buckingham, Virginia. The ultimate outcome is that he defeated an entire British Legion detachment and captured several of their horses by himself. One night, outside of a tavern, 9 British Legion cavalrymen surrounded Peter and ordered him to be arrested. As a further embarrassment, they ordered Peter to hand over his silver shoe buckles. "Take them yourself, if you're man enough," was Peter's answer. Thinking they had safety in numbers, the men actually went for Peter's shoe buckles. This had to be one of the dumbest things British soldiers ever did during the war. Peter had a strong reputation, and he was the closest thing to a Leviathan they would ever see. He may have surrendered peacefully if they didn't tick him off. Instead, he took a soldier's saber and struck him on the head with it. The wounded soldier fired his pistol at Peter, grazing his side. Peter, in return, nearly cut off the soldier's hand. Another soldier aimed a musket at Peter, but it misfired. Peter grabbed the musket from this soldier, knocked him off his horse with it, then escaped with the horse. The details of what exactly happened are fuzzy. Even Francisco's own accounts of it, years apart, have conflicting information. There were 9 soldiers. That is consistent. He captured 8 of their horses. That still tracks. But did he kill just 1 soldier or 3? Years later, in 1820, Peter claimed 1. 9 years after this, he claimed 3. The other soldiers ran off, fearing for their lives. It is possible that Peter came across new information over the years. He whipped these guys pretty bad. Maybe 2 more guys died of their injuries after the fight. At any rate, Francisco's fight was most impressive. Just think of what he would have done to them if he was at full strength and not recovering from a bayonet wound. The dirty punks. Even Hercules retired. At the age of 21, in 1781, Peter was ordered to join the Franco-American Army at Yorktown. By the time Peter got there, he was too late for the fighting. America won the war. He did, however, witness the surrender of the British Army by their commander, Lord Cornwallis. And that was it. Peter was done fighting. It took up a huge part of his formative years, and I think he really liked what he did. I also think he was ready to move on with his life. Peter did a whole lot of killing, and administered some pretty bad beatings. He also got hurt a lot. Peter was proud of his work and the American cause, but now he just wanted to live like a real person. Unlike some of the stories you hear about war heroes, Peter's was a relatively happy one. He adjusted to civilian life rather well. At first, Peter pursued a basic education. He was in his early 20s, going to school with little kids. They were absolutely fascinated with his war stories and the physical things he could do. Legends developed about Peter's strength, making him a fantasy character in his own lifetime. Peter didn't seem to mind this, as it was all positive. At the age of 24, in 1784, he married a woman named Susanna Anderson. She was the daughter of Captain James Anderson. The Andersons were of high society in the Cumberland County area of Virginia and had a plantation called the Mansion. It's kind of ironic when you think about it. In his life, Peter went from one mansion to another. Peter and Susanna had a son named James and a daughter named Polly. Sadly, in 1790, after only 6 years of marriage, Susanna died of dysentery, leaving Peter a widower with 2 small children. He remarried in 1794 to a woman named Catherine Brooke. She was, in fact, a relative of Susanna. With Catherine, he had 4 more children, Susan, Benjamin, Peter Jr., and Catherine. Peter and Catherine were married for a long time until she died in 1821. Amazingly, he married for a third time in 1823 to a woman named Mary West. Despite the fact that he ended up being twice widowed, Peter Francisco seemed to be a well-adjusted individual. He did, however, spend the later years of his life in poverty. Peter petitioned Congress and the Virginia legislature for a pension and got one. There was no soldier who deserved it more. Peter spent the last 3 years of his life working as the Sergeant at Arms to the Virginia State Senate. He basically functioned as an armed bodyguard. In early 1831, at the age of 70, Peter died of appendicitis. He was buried with full military honors in Shockoe Hill Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. The Virginia State Legislature shut down for the day, and many of the legislators went to his funeral. For the most part, Peter Francisco enjoyed a good, long life. Everyone has their ups and downs. There is no escaping it. But Peter's ups more than made up for the downs. He was a legend in his own lifetime who was able to adjust his civilian life and even found love. Although he's not one of the most famous historical figures, like he should be, he is still very well respected by people who know about him, including myself. A number of monuments and honors have been given to him throughout the years. Peter Francisco was not a tragic hero. He had a willingness to make something of himself, and he did it. I'm proud to declare him as a true action hero of history.